Hi, everyone. I'm Bruce Parker. I'm a mentor, a licensed real estate broker, a director of Best School of Real Estate.
Now, my sister is a professor of economics at Cornell. Her Economics 101 classes are in a gigantic auditorium. And the first thing she teaches people in economics are what are the economic characteristics of value? Well, it's demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. Those are the economic characteristics of value, and they apply to everything. So, what is demand? By the way, it spells out DUST, D-U-S-T, and anything that spells out an acronym when you have a multiple choice exam with four possible answers in your multiple choice questions, a question like this certainly will have some elements of DUST. So what is demand? Demand is the need or desire to have something, and that's the first half or the front of demand. What's the second half or the back end of demand? That's the availability of capital to satisfy that desire or need. So, the overall stated goal for many Americans is still to own their own home. So there's a need or desire to own your own home. But really, the thing that affects pricing the most is the availability of capital to satisfy that desire or need. One of the reasons houses went up so far in value when Joe Biden was president was because during COVID, right, and he came in at the beginning of COVID, right, the COVID started during Trump, but Biden came in at the beginning of COVID. They passed all these bills in order to help people because, people were not able to work with COVID, and they pumped money into the system. They printed money. They increased our M1 supply by 30%. And when you increase the availability of capital, when you increase the money supply, it causes demand to go up. And when demand goes up, then prices go up. Now, Joe Biden put a lot of money into M1. He put a lot of money into the system. By the way, how do they do that? They just crank up the printing presses and press it and print it, right? We're not on a gold or silver standard anymore. They just print the money. So again, the extra capital that was available caused prices to go up. In 2008, when the secondary market locked up, and we'll talk about the secondary market again, but we talked about it once in mortgages and financing. When the secondary market locked up, there was no longer money to lend. And so demand went way down, not because people no longer wanted houses, but because there was no longer any money available to borrow. And so that caused demand to go down. And what happened to prices? They went way down. So this demand part of the economic characteristic of value is very important. The next component is utility. How useful something is affects its value. And that is the power or to render a service or fill a need. A lot of statistics show that home ownership is the number one way Americans build wealth. There's also statistics that show if you own a home that your children go further in school. Unfortunately, there's a statistic out now that the average age people are buying their first home has gone up to 40. That's a real shame because that means a lot of people are going to buy a home when they've already raised their children. They got to do something about housing costs. Anyway, utility is the power to render a service or fill a need. And if you think about it, if something has no use at all, it has no value. If something has no use at all, it has no value. So that's the second component. That's utility. The third component is scarcity. Scarcity has to do with supply and demand. Now, let's talk about 2008 again. So the demand dried up because there was no capital and people were losing their jobs and they couldn't afford to sell their houses or refinance. So a lot of houses were foreclosed. As a matter of fact, at one point we had almost 10% of houses in America under some sort of foreclosure track. So that brought a lot of foreclosures to the market. What did that do to prices? It helped to accelerate them downward. So not only did prices go down because there was no money to lend, prices also went down in 2008 because there was a flood of distressed properties coming onto the market. Scarcity is considered in relation to supply and demand. How scarce something is might affect its value, and how plentiful it is might affect its value. So right now, there are no houses on the market. And since there's no houses on the market, they're very scarce. Prices are accelerating up very quickly. A couple of weeks ago, I put a house on the market in East Brunswick that I told the seller would sell for $599. And I suggested he price it right there. But I told him people would probably bid that up higher because there was that only a few houses on the market in East Brunswick in that price range. Well, we have had a crazy bidding war. We are up to $660,000. So that's $60,000 above full price. And when agents call me now and the agents say to me, "Hey, Bruce, I really want my buyer to get this house. What should I do?" I tell them, tell your buyer to waive the appraisal, to waive the home inspection, and to waive their money goodbye because they're going to have to pay a lot of money for this house. So again, scarcity affects value. Next is transferability. Now, when we talk about real estate, it's not transferable. Real estate suffers from not being fungible. That means you can't take real estate in New Jersey and move it to Texas. For instance, if there was no houses for sale in New Jersey, we can't go to a state like Michigan where there's some houses on the market and bring them here. So there's no physical mobility. So real estate is not fungible. But there is a second part to the concept of transferability. That second part is the possession and control of rights of ownership. How secure is your ownership in your real estate? And how do we achieve really good protection for our ownership of our homes? We do that with title insurance. That is the purpose of title insurance. Because if you are able to get a title insurance policy on your house, you have what we call evidence of marketable title. Now let's talk about transferability in a little different light. My son years ago wanted a quad, one of those little motorcycles that has four wheels. And I'm a big motorcycle guy. I still have motorcycles and I still ride. But my son wanted a quad. And I was looking for a quad on Craigslist. If I would find a quad and it had paperwork, it had a title and a motor vehicle registration, it was more expensive than if I found a quad that had no paperwork. Now, why is that? Because if a quad had no paperwork and it was stolen, let's just think, and the real owner came up and said, "That's my quad," I don't have control of the rights of ownership because I can't prove it's mine. Therefore, it has less value. So we achieve our transferability by having title insurance, which gives us evidence of marketable title. And that is truly something that gives value to your home. There's a lot of times that they talk about how easy it is to foreclose or how easy it is to do eminent domain and seize properties from people. Well, they forget that if they make it easier to foreclose or easier to seize properties from people for eminent domain or if you're doing in a town, if you're redeveloping a town and they make it easy for the government to take your house, it actually reduces the value because we lose our possession and control of rights of ownership, which give us some element of value. So again, the economic characteristics of value are demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. Now, there's another element that we didn't mention here, and that's situs. Situs means location, location, location. Real estate is really location based. Here in Highland Park, which is only 1 square mile, there's 3 distinct neighborhoods, the north side, the south side, and the triangle. The same house in the triangle is worth less than a house on the north side. Why? Well, I can give you potential reasons, but no real reason. Location is the key. Location is king. Another example is in Edison. If you live in 08817, your kids go to Edison High School. If you live in 08820, your kids go to J.P. Stevens. Much better high school. So people who live in 08820, their houses are worth more than people who live in 08817 because it's location, location, location. All right.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you can get notified of what's new.